I burned through an intro real quick on what GDG is. We're not part of Google. We are Google enthusiasts. We're an outreach, the community outreach effort of Google. We're all volunteer organizers. So there's all of the GDG Twin Cities group organizers are here tonight. I'm Lloyd Kledman, the founding co-organizer. Who else do we have? Stephen Fluen, Jeff Williams, and in the back is I already made you guys Patrick Clinton. This guy right here. So the four of us help make these events happen, but really, as we continue to say, they couldn't happen without members of the community stepping up and bringing some great content. So if you have something you'd like to talk about, we'd love to hear from you. Talk to any one of us. So that's this. We're continually one of the top 10 chapters in the US, the GDG Twin Cities is. GDG is the Google Developer Groups, is a worldwide effort, blah, blah, blah. There's Google's cheating. What's that?
I think Buffalo's
Oh, I know. Can you believe that? So you can set up, like any metric, you can gain a metric. So they've set up like bi-weekly recurring coffee hack things. If anybody wants to host a coffee hack, get our metrics up. Anyway. Other initiatives by Google kind of outreach is they make designated Google, they changed the name. They are now Google experts, developer experts. Google experts in different product lines. And so these are people who've been vetted by Google as not only being experts in the topic that they are named in, but also active in the community, active in outreach, and good speakers, kind of good community face representatives for these different events or different products. And we're pretty fortunate in our chapter to have two Google experts. Both of them are here tonight. One speaking, Daniel Liu, and Stephen Fluen as well. So good to have these resources. If you would like to be considered for the Google Expert Program, talk to Stephen or Daniel, and they'll tell you more about it. Most of our stuff, this terribly dated-looking website, is all Polymer, but we run all of our events through meetup.com. So if you want to get announcements of upcoming events, please join us. And we just passed 1,000 members this last month. I've been hoping for a while. Tell your friends about it. And we have about, on average, we have, hand this over for a sec. We meet the first Tuesday of the month. We've been going back and forth between Code 42 and our great host here at Augusto. Our big event, kind of our biggest event of the year, is coming up in February. We don't have the date on here. February 6th is a Saturday. Mark your calendars. Last year we had about 280 people show up for a day. We had 35 speakers, 5 tracks, downtown Minneapolis. Great food, incredible content. It's looking like we're gonna outdo that by a large margin this year. We have as our keynote speaker, we have Chet Haas, who is kind of a famous person in the Android world, a great speaker, comedian, a joy to hear from. So he's gonna be speaking from Google. The New York office of the Google Cloud team is coming out. We've got some heavy pressure and a soft commitment from the Firebase team to come out, so we're going to have some pretty heavy Google representation. But again, we couldn't make this happen, our community happen, without the great content that we have locally. We have the Twin Cities is really blessed, I think, with a really killer tech scene. So we're looking for speakers. Submit your speakers, and Stephen is our speaker wrangler. We set an early deadline this year. Last year we were too soft on the deadline and it made things too complicated. So the deadline for talk submissions is?
The 19th.
The 19th of this month,
Yes.
November 19th. So even if your idea is a little loose, please go ahead and submit a talk so we have a placeholder for it. We'll get back to you and see how that fits in our agenda. Any other announcements for GDG?
This is
Oh yeah.
kind of a sideways announcement, but I was really lucky. I won a watch. It's a watch, right?
What's a watch?
360. And I'm not much of a watch developer, so I thought an idea would be to share it with the group. So if you're interested in watch developments, let me know. And I'm thinking maybe we can, like, every month switch over or something if you're interested.
Thanks, Chuck. And that was, Chuck got that because at the end of every event, or for each of these events, there's a survey. So one of the things, I kind of glossed over in my spiel, but Google's a big fan of metrics. They're kind of culturally, they like metrics and measuring things. And now that the Google developer groups has moved beyond somebody's 20% project to really kind of a global effort with a full team, they have a team of about, I think there's about 10 people that are full-time. Their staff is supporting the Google developer groups worldwide. There's 2 folks that support North America, which is the United States and Canada because of tariffs and whatever. So they, to kind of prove the worth and the effectiveness, one of the things they have is a survey, which I don't have the link posted here anyway. It's bit.ly/GDG survey. So at some point tonight, if you would fill that out, I have a link. I'll post that on the meetup as well that'll autofill. You need to select our group. And so Chuck won his gadget by drawing. Every quarter they're going to draw randomly from people who submit the survey. And then also our group won the next quarter. So that's what this Chromebook is. So I'll pull this up and we can pass it around as well. To fill out the survey later, maybe at some point after Valerie's talk. So enough of an intro, except that I want to say huge thanks to Augusto, one of our longest running supporters. Thanks so much for the space and the food. I would say thank you very much. Do you have any announcements? Anything for the group? Any words of?
Well, I just mentioned just what we do here at Augusta very quickly. We are pretty focused on product development, all on Google's cloud platform and on the Chrome technology, Chrome base and Chromebook, Chrome devices. So if you have any interest in that, Google Augusta people, managers involved in Augusta development, talk to any of these guys and they can tell you more about what we do.
Cool. It's always fun to hear what these guys are up to. And you're hiring?
Always hiring.
Always hiring. Augusta.com/jobs, careers.
What kind of entry-level skill sets?
One
do you
point
have?
of
The main page, you'll see it later.
All right, find it off their website.
Google it.
So, tonight up first we'll have Daniel. I couldn't even dare to do a proper introduction, so I'll let you.
Hi, Daniel.
Daniel? I've done Android for a while, and I work in Valarie.
Just a little.
Hello. My goal here, I gave this talk at a recent DroidCon in New York, and the time limit there was 40 minutes, and when I first started practicing the talk before I gave it, I kept coming up with like 45 or 50 minutes that it took me to give the talk. Then when I actually gave the talk at DroidCon New York, it took me 33 minutes, and that's when I cut out slides. So I felt like I was talking perhaps a bit too fast. So my goal today is to speak a little slower. Not because I don't think you could follow me going faster, but I talk way too fast. Alright, so the theme of all of my talks is pretty much that I did something wrong on Android for many years, and now I'm doing things slightly less wrong. And this time, the focus of that is going to be styles and themes. And in general, you can really abuse them into doing very bad things for your system. So as a quick overview for people who don't know Android at all, or aren't too familiar with styles and themes, I'm going to go over first styles and then transition to themes, and for the reason they'll become obvious soon. So styles, what is a style? Well, in XML you define all of your layout views and attributes. And a style basically allows you to extract those attributes into something that can be duplicated in multiple different views. So here I've got a view with a background set on it. Instead, I can extract this into a style called MyStyle. And then in MyStyle, I have the same Android background defined, but now in the view, instead of having to define the background explicitly, I can point it towards this style. And essentially all that happens is those attributes I define in the style get subsumed into the view when it's inflated. So these two sets of code produce the exact same output. So the question then becomes, when would this little trickery become useful? And I think the real time when styles are handy is when you have multiple semantically identical views. And so what I mean by that is the multiple views that have the exact same purpose. And so my example here is a calculator, because a calculator has all these buttons on it, especially like the 0 through 9 buttons. And you want them all to look the same. So if you change the font on it, or if you change the color on it, it's really handy if you can just change it in one place. So you can have this one single style and apply it to every single button. So that's when it's really useful. Another way to put it is that all the views that are using a particular style should change at once whenever you change an attribute. That is, there shouldn't be any conflict. If you change an attribute, it shouldn't cause any problems for any other views. So that brings me to when you should not style. One time that I did things very wrong is creating a style for every single view. So even if the style is only used in one place, I created a style for it. This isn't necessarily wrong, but it's a lot more work than is necessary. It's very easy to create a style post hoc. Like you can have all your attributes inline and then decide, oh, I need a style later and extract them very easily. So it's kind of, I think, just a waste of effort to have single-use styles. The thing that really bit me, though, was when multiple views were coincidentally using the same attributes. So I have these two text views here, and just so happens at right now in the code that they're using the same text color and text color hint. So way back when I first started, I think this is a great place for me to use a style, because that'll allow me to reduce duplication on the code. But if you look at the IDs of these two, you can see that they are really meant for two different purposes. One's supposed to be the title of this, of whatever layout this is, and the other's supposed to be kind of the body text. And obviously, these aren't always going to be in sync. Like I can easily conceive of a time when I want the title to be like maybe a different color than the body would be. And when I get to the point where I want to edit that, I don't want to have to think about the style in terms of like all the places being used. I want to be able to just edit the style and not have to worry about the fact that it might have some unintended side effects. A way that I think of this is also in code, and how ridiculous the same notion would be in code. Because I think people, for some reason, myself included, when I looked at it in XML, it made sense in XML, but if we look at it in code, it will no longer make any sense whatsoever. So suppose I have these two static final variables that mean something different in the code. So the first one is the number of columns that I have in some grid view, let's say. That happens to be 3. The other is a number of retries I make when I make some network call. You know, if the network call fails, I want to try again. I'm going to try again 3 times. So these both happen to be 3, and I think, great. I can reduce this down to 1 constant now. So I replace that with the number 3. Now this is really dumb from 2 perspectives. One is that 3 is already a constant. Yeah. But moreover, even if you had a more complicated example than just an integer, you don't actually, you've lost all semantic meaning here. And they didn't mean the same thing in the first place. So if I want to say, reduce the number of retries because the server team's getting mad at me for pinging the server too hard, and I reduce that to 1, well now my grid view is also going to have 1 column. So you wouldn't do this in code, so why would you do it in your layout? Why would you do this with your styles? So if you don't, like I said before, I'm not pro single-use styles, and that's because it's so easy to extract styles. So suppose we've got this layout, it's got 4 attributes on here, and I want to extract a style for it. It turns out that in Android Studio, if you right-click on the view, you can go to this refactor menu, and then extract style. And if you go to extract style, you get this nifty little dialog box here, and it lets you pick which of these attributes you want to extract and turn into a style. Bam, that's easy. And also, there's a button up there where it says launch use style where possible. And that just says it'll go and look through all of your views and find all of the places where those particular set of attributes happen to match up. Now again, you don't want to just apply this blindly, but that can be useful if you've got 8 different buttons on a screen, you want them all to be the same. You don't have to go copying and pasting the code, cutting and pasting all these 8 different places. You can do it once pretty easily. Inheritance. All right, let's make styles a little more complicated. So up until now, I've been having just styles on a single level where it's just attributes extracted from a view. You can actually have a hierarchy of styles, though. You can have inheritance, and it's pretty simple stuff. You can have a parent style, and then you can define a child. And there's kind of 2 ways of defining children. There's an explicit way, where you have a parent attribute. And then there's an implicit way where you use a dot. So these 2 child setups actually mean exactly the same thing. So in both cases, they're saying the parent's going to be the parent and the child's going to be the child. And then the inheritance rules are fairly intuitive. It's just whatever happens to be in the parent is automatically also included in the child. And anything in the child can also override what's in the parent. So that's nifty, but it brings up this question of what happens in a custody battle. What happens if I use both the implicit and the explicit parenting? So I've got these implicit and explicit parents, and now I've got this child style that's using both methods at once. So the question is, who gets the child? So who thinks, by show of hands, who thinks that both of them merge attributes? All right, no one does. Who thinks the implicit one wins? All right, a couple people. Who thinks the explicit one wins? Yes, and you're correct. The explicit one is the winner, and the implicit one gets completely ignored. So this leads to this consequence of problems, because if you mix them, you actually don't get the result you think you're going to get. What you get is a child that looks like it's getting attributes from two parents, but is actually only getting from one of them. And in fact, it's misleading to a greater degree than you think, because it's often the case that you need to look at the parent class to figure out inheritance and all that stuff. But here, when you use dots, and when you mix the two of them, you're actually very pointedly misleading someone, because what they see in the code is this dotted notation that makes them think, oh, I know what the parent is. It turns out it's not that. So for example, suppose I have this button style, and it's saying, but widget.button.calculator. Just looking at this code, I would think that the parent of this would be widget.button. But it turns out it's not, because if you look at the style definition I set up here, the parent is something completely different. So it's just completely misleading to do this. The problem that people run into, though, is that those dots look really nice. It gives you this wonderful feeling to have these dots out there, creating this hierarchy, and so you use the dots, but then you just confuse everyone. So my advice in general is to just avoid, if you're going to have an explicit parent, because you do need to do that sometimes in Android, especially if you're parenting a style included in base Android. In those cases, just have no dots on the child. And that's, you don't get to have that nice dotted setup, but this is so much more clear what's going on. You know that when you go and look at that style, there's either going to be explicit parent or there's going to be no parent. An alternative, if you really want to go through a lot of work, is to fake it. And that's where if you want to define, I want to have a widget.button and I want to have a widget.button.borderless, I could say, okay, I'm going to set up the parents in such a way that that also matches what I did. And also make sure that all the attributes that are in widget.button also happen to be in widget.button.borderless, along with whatever modifications you want it to make. And this is how a lot of libraries do it from Google in order to make your lives easier. Because if you actually look at things like what AppCompat's doing in the background here, it's really, really complicated. So they're faking it hardcore in order to make your life easier, because then when you parent widget.appcompat.button.borderless, you actually get what you expect. Multiple styles. So obviously styles kind of have an equivalent in CSS. It'd be really cool if you had classes and you could apply multiple classes to a view. And it turns out you can't do it. There's only one style per view on Android. So all of that handiness that could be possible is not possible, with one exception, which is this thing called text appearance. So what text appearance does is I forgot to turn that off. What happens with text appearance is that I'm going to just turn that off now so it doesn't pop up again. Boom. What happens with text appearance is it's another place you can define a style. You can define a second style just for text view based views. And in that specific style, you can't apply anything you want, but you can apply any of these attributes up here. And these are all the normal text related attributes like color and font and some other ones you probably have never heard of. I'd never heard of elegant text height until I started working on this top. That's a new one, I think, in Lollipop. So with text appearance, you can have a text view that has a style, my style, and a text appearance on top of that. And as a result, you'll get both of those styles combined. One thing you want to be careful of is with styles, you can typically get away with not having a parent defined, because my style there, that will just merge with whatever default attributes happen to appear in the text view. The text appearance is not that case. What is in text appearance is just the entirety of what they use for those attributes. So if you define this my text below without a parent, and you just define text color, it's going to use some really, really awful defaults for every other value. So you're going to have a font size of like 1. It'll be invisible. What other attributes they have back here? It's all going to be like white color, like, yeah, it's really bad. So you want to always define some parent, and that parent text appearance should be something where it has all those same default values, and then you can just modify from there. In case you're wondering, in terms of importance, text appearance attributes get overridden by styles and inline attributes, and styles can be overridden by anything written explicitly on the view itself. Okay, so that's styles in a nutshell. Are there any questions before I move on to themes?
So which one gets the priority? Either
What was that?
Which one gets the priority? The style or the text?
The style gets the priority over the text appearance, if you happen to have the same attribute in both. Anything else? All right, I'm gonna move on to themes. Themes are cool because styles, if you notice, they only apply to individual views. So but with themes, you can apply it to so many things at once. Instead of applying it to just one view, you write a whole bunch of UX code all at once. So it's a lot more powerful. You can leverage it to do a lot more to your app at once. You can do things like set up defaults for everything. So instead of having to apply a style manually to every single button, you can set up a default button everywhere. You can have activity level theming. So you can theme things that don't make sense because they don't make sense on a view level because they aren't even views. Things like, what is the status bar color? That's not a view in your hierarchy, that's just some activity attribute. That's basically what I just said. And then you can do theme swapping too, which is something I won't go deep into because I've never done it myself, but if you have an application where you have like a light theme and a dark theme, that's only really possible if you use themes. So what is the difference between themes and styles? Why did I put them into the same talk? A really good reason I put them in the same talk is because they're exactly the same thing. You can see on top I've got a style and on bottom I've got a theme. The difference is very minuscule because they're both using the style tag and they both have the exact same syntax. And it's kind of, I think, an important point to understand that they are using the exact same system. What's different between them is how they're used. So they have a different scope. Styles, when you're using them, apply, like I said, just to the view, whereas themes apply to an entire activity or a set of views all at once. But the other big thing is that they affect entirely different attributes. So in terms of view styles, it's really just the attributes that you would have applied yourself by hand, so it's saving you a little bit of time. With themes, it's basically meta-programming. So instead of saying, I want this button to look like this, you're saying, I want all buttons to look like this. So there aren't actually any shared attributes between the styles and the themes. So along those tokens, do not mix up styles and themes. Another thing that kind of drove me nuts when I first started. Because I'd say, okay, I've got this theme, I'm going to have all of my styles inherit from the theme, because that makes sense, because you got these nice dots everywhere. But it doesn't make any sense to the system, because the system view is going to look at the theme attributes and be like, I don't know what those are, just chuck it out the window. So it's probably mostly harmless to mix them up, except for that the understanding of the code will be a lot more difficult. So there's a few different ways to define themes. You can define it two ways in your manifest. So you can define it for the application, and this just becomes your default activity theme that's applied to any activity that starts. And then alternatively, in an activity, you can define a specific theme for it. Now these don't cascade, so if you have a theme set on the activity, all of the attributes in the application theme are just ignored. A new thing that's popped up recently is view level theming, and this has been like a total awesome new feature, which is that instead of having to apply a theme to the entire activity, you can apply a theme to just a view and its subviews. And so there's actually kind of two different ways of doing that. You can do a theme, like Android : theme, and that applies to this particular view here. And then there's also pop-up theme, which is useful on occasion for things that pop up menus. Because usually those pop-up menus themselves want to have a different theme. So for example, you used to have like, when they first introduced the action bar, if you wanted to have a light theme for the activity, but then you wanted to have a dark action bar, you have to define a theme that was like light activity, dark action bar, all combined into one. And then if you wanted the pop-up to be a different color, screw you. It was very difficult. It was very, very hard to get all that set up correctly. Now it's very easy, because you can just say, I want my whole activity to have a light theme, and I would like this particular part of it to have a dark theme, and I'd like the pop-ups to have a third theme. So it's so much easier to do now with view level theming. And so someone told me, I don't remember where I read this, but someone revised recently that if you have a blank slide, people will pay more attention. So this is probably the most important slide. It's going to be my hint to that. Powerful speaking techniques also taught to you live. Use AppCompat. This is my advice. AppCompat, if you do not know it, is a support library provided by Google free of charge. A lot of their stuff is built on AppCompat. And sometimes people think that the only real use for AppCompat is if you want to use fragments, but that's not the case. You can use AppCompat without using any fragments. What's great about AppCompat is that a lot of troubles that used to exist in theming go away. A lot of things that used to make theming very hard are no longer nearly as hard because of AppCompat. So if you're at all interested in theming, which I think you should be because it makes programming easier, you should probably base your application off AppCompat. So in particular, what it lets you do. First of all, one of the big things it does now is it adds material theming to all devices. So Material was the new design language introduced in Lollipop. And as we all know, Android operating system does not get updated on everyone's phone all the time. So if you are having to work, if you, God forbid, have to release apps pre 5.0, if you're having to work on the ancient 4.x branch, then without AppCompat, you have to deal with the fact that you're theming for both Holo and for Material. And that sucks. It's a lot of work, especially because there are lots of subtle differences between the two in terms of padding and margins and whatnot. So getting everything to look just right is really difficult. Using AppCompat allows you to have this one single baseline that you can start modifying from. And I'll tell you that users don't complain that they have a 4.0 device but are getting Material look. They like the Material look. So like I said, baseline themes and styles. This is even more important than you realize because there are so many themes and styles out there on all these different devices. It's good to have a style that you can take and then modify and you know it's going to work. So if you want to take a button and tweak it so that the button has a different font color, for example, before AppCompat, you have to make sure to inherit a bunch of different buttons in the system and then make sure to apply those all correctly in the themes. AppCompat pretty much does that for you by using their baseline themes and styles. It enables view theming pre-Lollipop. So that view theming stuff I told you that saves so much sanity, if you don't use AppCompat, you only get that on Lollipop and above. But AppCompat does some magical stuff in the background, which allows you to use view theming before Lollipop, all the way back to, I think, 4.0. Which is about as far back as you should be developing anyways these days. So that's great, and it saves me so much time. And more stuff, which I'll go over. So use AppCompat. That's my one big sanity saving tip. So now that I've mentioned what themes are, what are the sort of things you can do with themes? So like I said, with views, you're taking the attributes you've normally set on views. With themes, it's a little harder to know what's out there, what's possible. So I'm going to give kind of a taster's choice, taster's sample of these things. So one level of things that theme attributes do are kind of like window level attributes. So these are affecting things on the entire window rather than any particular views in your setup. So for example, the window's background, if you want to change what the background is drawn below everything else, if you want to change the status bar color, if you want your activity to be a full screen activity instead of having those navigation UI around it. So that's sort of window level attributes. Another new thing is color attributes. This was also introduced in Lollipop and backported with AppCompat, and another good reason to use it. There are so many widgets. Before color attributes existed, you had to make all of your own assets anytime you want to change any of the colors in your app. So if you wanted the button to be slightly blue, you had to cut up 9 different new assets for all the different states the button could possibly be in. And that sucked. But now you can just say, let's use tinting. I want the main color of my application to be blue. I want a dark version of it to be a darker blue. I want most of my widgets to look white. And you do that, and the app will just, all the default widgets will style themselves automatically and tint themselves. So instead of you having to cut all these assets, it'll just do it for you. So this is a huge time saver, and it's great. It allows you to set up default styles. So like I said, I said this earlier, you don't want to have to take a style that you've written for your buttons and go and apply it manually to every single button. It's a lot better to instead, I'm going to define a button style, and then it just gets automatically applied to every single button in the system. And here, again, it's nice to have AppCompat because I can say my button, I'm going to actually subclass that from an AppCompat button. So again, I'll get that consistent look, and I only have to worry about one particular style I'm dealing with. Another thing you can do with these default styles is, so button style is for a button view. Spinner item style, there is no actual spinner item view, but there is a spinner item layout that comes by default with Android. And so you can use this default layout and style what that layout's going to look like without actually having to write your own layout files. So that's kind of a nice time saver. And in the same way that you can style views, you can also set up default text appearances across your application. You can do resource attributes. So in this case, instead of saying I have an Android background where I'm going to define a color directly on it, I can add a layer of indirection. So a place where I use this all the time is selectable item background. And what this attribute means is, when I click on a button, what is it going to look like when I click on it? What's going to be the thing that's drawn on top of it to indicate that I clicked on it? Or when I click on a list view row, what's that going to look like? So here, if I set up a selectable item background, by default, all my widgets in the application will start using that default look when I click on it. So again, instead of having to go to every single button and say, I'm going to define the background specifically to be this thing, I can set up an attribute instead. And if I ever decide I want to change that background when you click, it'll change it everywhere. So one thing you might have noticed through all of these previous slides is that sometimes I start the attributes with Android : and sometimes I do not. So the reason I do this is because the official attributes, you have this Android : before it because it's built into the Android operating system itself. But the problem is that for some of these attributes, like the coloring, this is V21 and above only. It's Lollipop only because it's got this nice theming thing going, color theming thing going on. If someone writes their own custom attributes, which is what AppCompat does, AppCompat basically duplicates all of the stuff that the theming does in order to be able to modify it for its own purposes. That's when it does, you have no colon in front of it. So if you're using a library that has custom attributes, that's when you don't use Android : And my general advice for knowing whether to use one or the other is just try it without, and if your app doesn't compile, then add the colon. That's the easiest way to do it, besides having to just go and memorize it all. So the biggest problem that I have with themes is finding what attributes there is to edit. So I know that okay, I've got an overflow menu, I click on the toolbar, it pops up this menu. How do I control the color of the background of that menu that pops up? It turns out that this is by far the most difficult part of theming. And I wish I had really good advice for this, but I don't. Instead, I'm going to give you a bunch of kind of half-assed advice, but it's the best that I could come up with. And the reason it's so difficult is that anyone can create attributes. So like I said, the Android : attributes are ones that are built into Android itself. Those are all pretty well defined. But then anyone can write their own custom attributes. That's how AppCompat had all those attributes that happen to have the same name as the default attributes, but are actually just being used in their own library. And to make the problems worse, anything in the code can use attributes at any time like it wants. And we're talking about in both XML and in code. So how can you look into where people are actually using it? If you're in XML, the telltale sign is the question mark. The question mark means question mark attribute means it's looking at an attribute for this thing. So most of the time you have the @ symbol and then the type. So you're saying @color/blue. That's a direct reference to some color resource. When you have the question mark attribute, what's happening is it's dereferencing things through the theme. So when those views are inflated, it's saying, okay, I'm going to find that attribute, and I'm going to see what's in the theme for that attribute, and then use that in its place. If you're looking in code, what you want to look for is resolve attribute. So that's if someone wants to grab a single value out of the theme. So resolve attribute is basically saying, I want to find out what the value is for this dialogue theme in my current theme. And then sometimes what people use is obtain style attributes, because resolve attribute is great if you're finding one attribute, but if you're finding like 20 at once, then resolve obtain style attributes is a lot faster. And you typically see this in view constructors. So in this case, you look for obtain style attributes, and then you can look, it returns a typed array, and in that typed array, you have all these values like get, int, that retrieve values. And so in that case, what you want to look at is the attribute of the default. So I'm telling you to go source code spelunking, and that's because I don't have much better, unfortunately. There is one trick I've found, though, and this has saved me a ton of time, which is figuring out colors of things. So suppose I've got this layout, and I want to figure out what is the color of that, what's defining the color of that logout button. I haven't personally defined the color of it. I know it must be somewhere in the theme. Something is telling that to be that color of black, and I want to modify it. What I've come up with is a debug color theme. So I basically went through and found every single color attribute I could find, and if you use this theme, it will make your app look ugly, but you can then use a color sampler to figure out what is actually coloring something. So here's how that screen looks with my debug theme. It looks beautiful. But then I can use something like the digital color meter to say, oh, that value is FFFF41. It can be a little off due to anti-aliasing, but it gets you close enough to what the actual value is. Because I think in the actual code it would be FFFF44. But then I can go and look in my theme and say, oh, that happens to correspond to this exact attribute. And then I know which attribute is actually affecting that. So that's one cool way to save time. Since coloring is a lot of the effort, I like that one. There's also the hierarchy viewer. And these tricks sort of only apply to the standalone hierarchy viewer. You can get to one in the IDE, but you have to use the command line one to get to this stuff, I think because it was like an intern project or something. But if you're using the hierarchy viewer, it shows you all your views. You can click on a view, and one of the things it'll show you, one of the properties it'll show you is the themes that are actually being applied to that view. So that's very nice if you're using view level theme, you can look up, specifically what themes are actually affecting this view. And then also there's this dump theme button, which is pretty new. And if you click dump theme, it'll show you what the current theme is for your activity, what all the attributes are. The only drawback here is that it's pretty limited. It only shows you the official attributes, but I'll take any help I can get. So here I want to pause and give you my recipe for sanity. So everything I've talked about up until now are things that I think work and are fairly easy to get working. And if you stick to all this stuff, you'll be pretty happy. So 1, use app pet, most important slide. 2, I suggest modifying the theme first, because the theme has so much more leverage. Instead of having an individual button, edit all the buttons at once. The third tip is to reference theme attributes wherever possible. Remember that question mark attribute / notation. Again, that's basically allowing you to use the theme to apply attributes all over, so if you ever happen to need to change it, again, it'll just automatically get applied everywhere, which is great. Apply themes to views when necessary. So this is where things can get handy if you need to have a different color scheme for a particular view, that can be useful in that case. And then the last thing is use styles wisely. So when you actually do need to use them, make sure that you're not doing that stuff before, like with the number of retries and the staggered review. So are there any questions up to this point? Because now I'm going to go into the weird stuff that you can get away with that will drive you nuts quickly. But it's sometimes necessary. All right, cool. Let's do some weird things. Resource qualifiers. So resource qualifiers are, all these resource directories. They have these dashes after them, and the dashes represent, which resources you're going to use given the configuration of your device. And so this you can use for like selecting which layout you're going to use in different device sizes, for example. And you can apply the same stuff to styles. So you don't have to have one single style. You can have multiple styles under the same name. So suppose I've got two different colors. One is defined in the default colors, and the one is values at V21. So in a lollipop above, I define a different color for VG window. I can then put that reference into my style. So now my style will change based on the system. So this can be useful. I use this a fair amount. But you can start taking this even further, where instead of just the attributes inside of the style or theme modifying based on the current device configuration, you can actually have the entire theme be modified. So suppose I've got a base toolbar and a base toolbar that's defined for lollipop and above. And the reason I separate these is because the one in lollipop and above has this elevation attribute. And the elevation attribute didn't exist before then, because Lint will yell at me. Now what I can do is have a third style, which has as its parent base toolbar. Now if I use the toolbar style, it'll automatically switch between those two styles above. And it creates this thing which I like to call like the qualifier triangle, where I've got these two base themes, which are not actually what you're used. They're just modified based on whatever the qualifiers you set up. In this case, lollipop versus everything else. But then below you have what you actually point to in code. And this gets really crazy really quickly because then you can have like a qualifier diamond, where you've got a base theme that has attributes everyone wants to use. Then you split it in the middle to have, based on whatever version of Android you're on, some modifications per qualifier, and then a third thing below that, which has some more attributes you want to apply to everyone. And you can keep doing this over and over and over again. It gets really messy really quickly. Again, this is where AppCompat's useful because they've gone through the trouble of doing this for you. There's actually, in the source code of AppCompat, if you go look at it, we document for how they do themes because it's so complicated. They have 4 levels of indirection by default. And I think it's like base, platform, theme, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, it's really complicated. So take it a little easy on the qualifier stuff, I would suggest. You can define your own attributes. Like I said before, anyone can define their own attributes at any time. The great thing about defining your own attribute is that, again, instead of having to apply an attribute manually to every single view, you can apply it to a whole bunch and change it all at once. So here I've got my attribute. I define that in a theme, and then I can reference that in a style, or I can reference that in a view. And again, this is useful, but this is sort of meta-programming. If you happen to define a theme that doesn't have that attribute defined, and you try to use it, your app will blow up in a way that is completely non-clear because the error message it gives you is nonsensical. So this is very useful if you're doing things like theme swapping, but it's kind of complicated. It's just a lot of extra work. You can have dynamic things. So if you want to change themes on the fly, there's a few things you need to know. One is that the easiest one is text appearance. You just call set text appearance and it changes. Well, ta-da, now it gets a lot harder. The problem with setting view styles and activity themes dynamically is that everything happens on inflation time. And this sort of makes sense. Like, what's happening with styles is it's just saying, the attributes I passed in when you inflate the layout actually use the ones from the style instead of whatever's the default. So with dynamic styles, you actually need to construct your own views yourself. And there's all these attributes here that you have to know what they all mean. So if you have a view, you have the attribute set, and that's all the attributes that are passed in. You have this third parameter called default style attribute, which is super mysterious and super confusing, because you'd think that that would be a reference to the style that you want to apply, but it's not. It's a reference to the attribute that's in the theme that points to the style that you want to apply to this view. And that's what existed all the way up to Lollipop, until in Lollipop they added this fourth one, default style res, which is actually the simple one where you just point to a style that you want to use. But unfortunately, that's Lollipop and above only, so you don't get to use it. But there is one more way to skip that default style stuff, which is to theme the context. Because where do you think all the theme is stored? It's stored in the context. And this is actually why it's important when you're inflating layouts to not use like the application context, but instead to use the context that's defined from the activity itself. Because that's the one that contains all of the theme attributes. So another way to do all this stuff is to use something called a context theme wrapper. So it takes your context and just wraps it and says, instead of your old theme, I'm going to apply a new theme on top of it. And so then if you use it with a layout inflator, or if you use it when creating in the view constructor, it'll have that new theme as well. And in fact, this is actually how AppCompat managed to backport the ability to do view theming, is just using the context theme wrapper, which has existed forever. It's just that people didn't think of using this stuff until recently. If you want to do dynamic theming on an activity level, there's this method called setTheme, which is very mysterious to people because what happens is they call setTheme and nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because it matters what time you call setTheme. Like I said, only time that styles and themes apply is on inflation. So if you call setTheme after you called setContentView and everything's inflated, nothing happens. So if you call it before setContentView, great, you're set and it should work. But otherwise, you have to do something to restart your activity so that it can get all of those new theme attributes. And that's it. That's all I got. If there's any questions now?
One, you talk about dynamic styling. You still have to package the themes and the styles with the application. Is there any way to load them at runtime, like from a server? You know what I mean? Retrieve the style or theme and actually load it into the context.
Not to my knowledge. I don't think, they did not set up the system for that level of dynamism.
If anyone finds that, let me know.
Yeah. There is someone who tried to make a library to do that called Prism, and you can still find it because it's open source. But unfortunately, like 2 or 3 weeks after the initial version got released, some lawsuit stuff started happening, of which the details are very fuzzy because it's a lawsuit, and it's no longer being developed for that reason. So that really sucks because there was someone who was making the attempt to give you the ability to define themes in code entirely.
That probably override the OEM's system theming and Samsung will be
I think it was something more around like someone stole the code and started trying to sell it or something like that. And so it was like, oh, I have to prove that I wrote it and that it's open source. And just... Yeah, so.
Well, if you're really crazy, you can rewrite the app in Sky.
In what?
Sky.
Sky? I don't know Sky.
Sky is this Google beta thing that's probably somebody's 10% project, honestly, where they're doing Darts for Android as a virtual machine on the Android device. And every app is loaded off the network every time you start the screen.
Yeah, I guess you could do that. although I would assume that the reason you want to do that is because like, the user has some preferences set, and that's why you define things dynamically. It sounds to me like Sky, you're downloading like the whole app and then running it. So how would you dynamically then say, actually, I don't want this version of the whole app, I want this? How do you run the code before you download the code? You can't. So
I haven't used it, I'm just saying that would be one way to solve it. Insane.
all right. If there's anything else, I'm around.
Thanks, man.
I'm switching to the other side. Maybe I'll be less dangerous. No, I'm going to be just as dangerous.
So our next speaker is someone who came to an event here, and when we said, "Boy, we'd love to hear from you," she raised her hand. So I'm thrilled to have Valarie give us a talk. And yeah, I don't know what else to have to. I'll let you introduce yourself. I always kind of fumble through good introduction.
I'm going to hand out some ancient technology for you guys. Dead trees. Just a few notes. There are some big changes coming in April of this next year that will affect everybody that is developing for the web, mobile or otherwise. Well, first, let's talk about what accessibility is. Accessibility is making sure that your project is available to anyone, no matter what their barrier is. Universal design is designing to make things accessible. And then accessibility is easy to approach, reach, enter, speak with, or use. So the idea of designing to be accessible is to think about any of your users and how they're going to interact with your project. So I know we get caught up sometimes in designing for the people that we talk to about our projects, and they understand the same things that we do at that level, but we need to think about our end users, especially if you're developing things for the public. The WAI is the Web Accessibility Initiative through the W3C, and they are the keepers of the standards. So anything that has to do with web accessibility or guidelines that we need to follow, they are the place to go. They have a ton of resources available for everybody. We would be here for hours if we wanted to go through all of the different things that you can do in your projects to make sure that it's accessible. But they have 4 principles of accessibility, which are to develop core websites and apps. That means they're perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And on the handout that I gave you guys, there's a little bit kind of highlights of each of those things and what they mean in that context. Like I said, there's a ton of specific guidelines. How you do those things are all available on their website. You can get there through the W3C or just Google the WCAG 2.0. Those are they're the guidelines that have been established as the minimum requirements now. And as of April 2016, the Department of Justice is going to bring those things in as law. So any website that is public facing, any application that the public uses must be compliant, or you will be asked politely to fix it. And so, right. It benefits you guys to learn these things now before that becomes a law, so that you're at least aware of what you can be doing when you're implementing your projects, so that you're compliant and not having to do things at the last minute when somebody demands you do it. So, Section 508 has been kind of the standard for government compliance on accessibility. The Section 508 and the WCAG 2.0 are merging into one, so that they're all the same guidelines across the board. Currently, websites of companies that are doing any kind of government work have to be compliant with that. Now it's going to be all of us. So this is stuff that, again, we could be here for hours going through the very specific things that are needed for this, but just be aware of them. The Android developer website has some really good information on accessibility, and they have some very nice features built into the code already. Kind of plug and play stuff that you guys can put in place in your projects and make it compliant. So they've knocked a lot of the research out of that for you guys. Some statistics. In the US, about 20% of all computer users have some kind of disability. 1 in 4 is visual, 1 in 4 is dexterity, and 1 in 5 is hearing disability. I don't know how many of you guys have played with your accessibility setting on your phone, but it's kind of an eye-opener to turn that on and try to find the apps that you like to use. It's hard. It's
frustrating.
It's super frustrating, and getting it to turn off so you can use it again is a pain in the ass. So I don't suggest you do it right now, but sometime do that. And while you're developing, make sure that you test in that form so that you know exactly what that experience is like for people who might be using a sight reader or some other accessible device to use your project. The other benefit of designing with accessibility in mind is just being more open for everybody, because not everybody has to have a specific disability to benefit from an accessible site. So, the pinch and zoom, that kind of technology, it was designed for people with eyesight problems, but it's beneficial for all of us. So, some things to consider when you're thinking about the accessibility of your project. Not just disabilities, physical or mental, but other kinds of accessible issues. What I like to do when I work on a project is have case study personas. So kind of think about who your audience is and kind of extreme cases of all of the people that could be interacting with it. So you have, disabilities covered or gender covered. Race and culture is one thing that we need to think about. Like if we're having certain things, certain context in our content, we need to make sure that we're being sensitive to anybody that could potentially use our product. It's a lot to think about, but if you cover it on the front end, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache in the end. Also, considering gender, trying to design from a gender neutral perspective so that you're not alienating any of your users. So just a few takeaways for each group. Using themes is probably a good way to avoid some of the pitfalls that you can fall into with accessibility, because I'm sure that is given some consideration when they develop themes for color contrast and that kind of thing. Using a default font size of 10 or larger, or letting that be auto, so that if a user needs to expand to be able to read it, they're not locked in at whatever you have set as a hard set. Also, giving things visually and orally so that if they're using a sight reader or any other kind of accessible device, they're going to be able to get it. One of the things that kind of surprised me was PDFs. If you don't build those a certain way in the program, like if you're in Word and you're designing a document that you're going to turn into a PDF, if you don't go and set it as an H1 heading in your document before you save it to the PDF, a sight reader will pull that up and not know what anything is on the page. It'll just show up as blank. So on a website or anything you're linking to, make sure that is also accessible. Captions on videos. Those are just a few examples of things to kind of consider while you're designing. And again, if your project has a global reach, pay attention to any cultural references that you're making. There's certain things that we might think are okay here in the United States, but then if a user in another country comes across that, they're going to be highly offended. And it's just bad business. So that is the gist of my talk. And if anybody has any questions about accessibility or needs help with that, just contact me. be glad to talk to you. Are there any questions for me now?
Actually, something you just said.
Yeah.
So like, you said linking the sites and making sure that those sites are accessible, but what if, like, you don't have direct control over the sites. Is it adequate to give like a summary of the content or like board other people? Is that, I'm new to web development.
Yeah.
Like, is that an okay thing to do to like take content that's out there that isn't accessible and like revamp it or change a little bit?
Obviously, you'd want to talk to the person that owns that content and reach out to them first. One thing that I'm kind of having an issue right now, I built a site for I work for a nonprofit called accessibility.org.
Cool.
We help people get jobs that have barriers to employment. So if it's disabilities or just coming to the country and not being able to speak the language or know the culture, any coming out of prison, any kind of barrier to employment, we help them navigate through that and get jobs. So I rebuilt their website. I came on board and they had hired a developer who made it out of Wix. Which at first I was like, okay, well that'll be easy for people to manage content. It's an easy interface. But then being accessibility.org had a accessibility test run on our website and it's not compliant. So I am currently trying to get them to comply with the coming laws, and I've gone through about 3 years of people asking them, like, hey, when are you going to make your sites accessible? And their only answer is, well, thank you for your comments, we'll consider that. And that's it for 3 years, so go ahead.
So which CMSs are the best accessibility citizens?
So I've heard that WordPress is actually one of the best because they have a lot of accessibility built in. Obviously, so most accessibility lives in the HTML. It's how things are coded. The problem with Wix is that they don't give you access to that. So any CMS that you can manipulate the HTML directly, it's going to be good. So as long as you go in and do it.
I didn't quite hear the last question. What was?
He asked what CMSs are good for accessibility, and I've heard that WordPress is one of the best.
I did also have another question.
Yeah.
Where's a good place to go to get like a feedback loop going with some people that do need like accessibility, like for like in your site? Where's a good place to go and get opinions for like good ideas or just general feedback on how you're doing and implementing these things?
Sure. There's a few organizations. There's actually one locally, it's called WeCo. They hire people with disabilities to do web testing. So they have a team that will look at your site, they'll go through everything, go through your code, and make suggestions on how you can make it more compliant. And they also, they won't do that work for you, so you can call me. So we could do that with you, but they're really good for testing purposes. Any other questions? Okay, thank you guys very much.
All right, I think that brings our topics to a close here. Next month, December 1st at Code 42, we've been having open workshop sort of formats. And so I was just talking with Brad about what we might have. We might have some kind of code labs on hand with maybe, how long it might take. And across a couple different things. We might have some Android code labs on hand, and definitely some web code labs. Polymer and Firebase are things we've been promoting and working towards there. So please join us next month at Code 42. The following month we'll be back here. We still have to confirm out for the next quarter and cycle, but most likely we'll be here. We'd love to hear you talk. If there's something you've been working on at work or on the side, and you think this is pretty cool, or even, I bet this would be cool, you should give a talk on it. It'll make you learn it really well. Any other announcements for the group? Patrick?
Oh, you can put the survey out.
Oh, the survey. Yeah, so I added a bit.ly/GDG survey, and if you add a TC on the end, it should fill in the drop down here for you. It should only take you a minute or so to fill it out, and it helps.
What's the URL again?
bit.ly GDG survey TC. John.
It's in the meetup comments.
And I posted it in the meetup comments,
Oh, great.
as well as the application for DevFest speakers. Tell your friends.
If you guys know any ladies that want to be presenters, let us know that too. We need more, right?
All right, so we've got a couple minutes left tonight.
Right.
That's it for our formal agenda. On to mingling. It looks like everybody ate all the hamburgers, so there's beers and ice.
Yeah, that's right.
Chew on the ice.
Lloyd, thank you for this.
Yeah.
Can you share this?